documentary. My partner in crime, programming partner here in San Diego, Beth Accomando, is with me. Hi, Beth.
Hello.
We're going to talk Fulci. And good, I see that we are live and we can just get started. I mean, I've got a whole list of topics.
I don't know. That was invisible when you held it up.
Oh, yeah, that is odd. I've got this list of ghost topics. Oh, it's gonna be a punch drunk session. I could. Yes, my ghostly list of topics, which is a little bit apropos, I guess. Wow, where do we even start with this? I kind of want to start by talking to you about one of the final lines in the documentary, which it was from Nocturnal Cinema guy Saigon talking about Fulci being an expert on Proust and all these different things, but then he starts talking about all this stuff. One theme that goes through the entire documentary is, how much is real, how much is fake, and does it really matter? He even says literally, I don't care what's not real. But he does end it by saying, I do believe in this bullshit. I love that line. So I kind of wanted to bring that up and ask you what you thought about that line between reality and fiction when it comes to a biopic.
Well, I mean, the very title, Fulci for Fake, with the F capitalized,
Yep.
is obviously referencing Orson Welles' F is for Fake.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole film was about the fascination for frauds and imposters and people who present themselves one way and are something else. So, I mean, that's obviously, I think, a deliberate reference and at the heart of this. And, as an artist, that's always something that you're doing. I mean, most artists, I think, put something of themselves in their work. The question is, how obvious is it that it's autobiographical, or how obvious is it that it comes from their life? I mean, someone like Quentin Tarantino, you really can't get any personal details from the movies he makes. I mean, I never feel like I've gotten any insight into like who he is as a person or what his life was like growing up, but I absolutely know every single film he's ever watched. Because I've seen his films. So they're personal in that respect. And so, I mean, I think that notion is always fascinating. I mean, you may think that Hitchcock's films don't necessarily reveal anything personal of him, and yet I'm sure there's either fears he has or people he's known that he puts in them. So, I mean, I think that's just kind of at the heart of most creative endeavors, is that notion of, how much of it is real, how much of it is fake, when do I cross the line, how do I blur the line?
I think what makes it interesting in this case too, with this documentary, is first of all the subject being Fulci, and what Fulci has that a lot of directors like Orson Welles or Hitchcock or whomever doesn't necessarily have, is a film like Cat in the Brain. So yeah, where I talked a little bit about Cat in the Brain with the director when we interviewed him, or when I interviewed him, because that is a very odd journal for Fulci. And when you read, I was looking at reviews of it, and almost universally, it's just people hate that film. Like it's a mess, it's a disaster. But it's just so I mean, I don't love Cat in the Brain, but I'm fascinated by it because he's playing himself, but he's playing a fake himself. But to what extent is it fake? And suddenly you have this documentary, which is kind of the same thing. And having that kind of as a groundwork for this it gives it another level, another layer of what's kind of interesting about Fulci, because we really only know him through his work. I mean, you and I really only know him through his work, which is dreamlike and ethereal and hard to describe anyway, the Simone, the director, called him the great liar, called Fulci the great liar. And he mentioned, of course, Fulci's famous line, which is, "I'm the terrorist of cinema." And the interpretation we talked about is he's the terrorist of like genre cinema. Like he kind of took what people knew about it and tore it apart and made it his own, which is funny because a lot of it is derivative, but yeah, I don't know. I still come back to Fulci for fake. What are some of your personal reactions to the technique of having a false storyline of an actor portraying Fulci and using that as the impetus to interview these people to learn who he was?
I mean, I think on a certain level, it's really clever and obviously very self-reflexive. And the thing is, we have so many kind of mockumentaries going on, and the levels of like how extreme the mockumentary is vary. So I think if I hadn't actually known Fabio Frizzi and seen like Antonello Fulci, there were certain points where I'm going like, how many of the people he's interviewing are real or not? So there was a moment where I was wondering, because I didn't read anything up about the film beforehand or anything. I just watched it cold. So there was a point at which I was thinking to myself, oh man, is the entire thing fake? To the point of all the people he's interviewing are pretending who they are. So I was grateful when I saw people I actually knew, that I could feel confident of certain levels of where the mockumentary was and wasn't. I mean, I think it's an engaging way to do it because it puts it in a different context. So you're not expecting the typical I mean, it is mostly talking heads, but the thing is the dynamic of how the discussion is going is much different because the person asking the questions is much more present in the discussion, as opposed to a documentary filmmaker who pretends to be objective and out of frame and not partaking in it.
Yeah, sometimes even cuts out their part of it.
Yeah. So, I think that makes it more engaging. Although, at the end, I'm kind of going like, okay, so where's this film where you play Fulci?
Yes. That is actually my thought too. It was like, I kind of want to see, a monologue or where you bring it together and present what you've learned. I kind of wish that had happened. I'm gonna look at.
I want to see him as John Belushi.
Actually, that brings up another line I wanted to get your feedback on, because I love that part of the documentary where he talks about that he'd rather be John Belushi. But let's see what we got here. So we've got a long list of chat.
Good.
Yeah, we've got Steve. Thanks for both Lizard and the documentary. Made for a great afternoon and evening. Jenny's going on a rant. The hidden agenda, the invisible plan. Oh dear, I'll stop. Jeff Pearson, per Robert Wool, the key to history is who tells the story. Nice quote, true. Jenny says maybe he meant the terror est, like the most terror. Print the legend. Isn't that what we all want? Yes. Yeah. So people are having their own conversation and reaction.
I mean, the sense of a terrorist also, though, when you think about it, a terrorist, I mean, and I've had discussions recently about terrorists because we've got protests going and people who feel they have no voice. And I mean, the thing about a terrorist frequently is, if you want to see it from their perspective, is it's frequently about people who don't feel they have a voice and who aren't being given a chance to make their statements. And so if you think of Fulci as somebody who, wants to make movies and at a certain point, is not being able to make the movies he wants, then, maybe the sense of being a terrorist is somebody who's like using by any means necessary and whatever you can manage to do to lob that grenade out there to get somebody's attention and shock them. So, you know, I think on a certain level, you could read it as that.
I love that. I that's something I hadn't thought of before, but that's an amazing read of the terrorist thing. Um, that makes me think of a bunch of things that actually. Uh, you told me you didn't see the interview with Simone, and I'm glad now because I actually want to get your thoughts about something. But first, let's go back to John Belushi real quick, because
He
when
looks more like John Belushi than Fulci.
absolutely, in fact, in the it's really charming. You know, I had a wonderful interview with Fabio Frizzi, and he talks about Nicola, the actor who plays this guy, and he's like, he doesn't look very much, you know. Like, he's absolutely right, and it. What makes it interesting is when they have the prosthetic makeup on him, it kind of is even worse in a way. It's an added layer of I don't know. It's very bizarre. But he follows the reason he says that he's interested in Belushi is because he says he feels more of a kinship because of his own passions. And then he says, like, passion could be, it leads to vices, addictions, destruction. Like he equates passion with vice, addiction, and destruction. I want that. That's usually not what we think of when we think of passion, really.
I don't know. That sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, it really does sound like there's a lot of truth to it. It's just in conversation when you talk about passion, it's usually in a much more positive light. I want when it comes to Fulci, it makes perfect sense. But I want, yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on that particular line.
Well, and again, I mean, within the context of this film, it makes perfect sense. And also, I mean, if you think of Belushi too, I mean, the way his life ended, I mean, you have to consider what things he was pursuing and what passions he had, and it ended up being completely destructive.
Yeah, or Andy Kaufman, or yeah.
So, I mean, I think when you think of passion in terms of an artist,
Mm-hmm.
I think it tends to resonate. You tend to think more, I think, of things that cause pain and are like not fulfilled, and they're passions that frequently don't get to be satisfied. So I think if you think of it more from an artistic point of view, that progression makes perfect sense, because you know you're passionate about making films. It is an addiction. You have to do it. You can't stop. And if you can't do it, or you know you try to do it and it fails, you know it can lead to really destructive things. But it's something you just can't stop. I mean, I think the great filmmakers are all people who can't do anything else.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of, you know, I mean, Orson Welles, I think, is a classic example. I mean, he pursued films across decades, shooting snippets here and there, making these patchwork quilt films, but nothing was going to stop him. I mean, actually, this makes me think of, I don't know how many people have seen the Jonathan Ross Incredibly Strange Film Show, which sadly has like vanished off the face of the earth because of copyright issues. But every episode of his show was about people who were so passionate about filmmaking that they would do it no matter what. And that could be somebody shooting a Super 8 film over 20 years, or making whatever they could whenever they could scramble enough money together, or whatever it took. And I think those episodes should be shown in film school, because I swear to God, at the end of every episode, all I wanted to do was run outside with a camera and make a movie. Like, it didn't matter what it was. I just wanted to run outside and make a film. You know, whether it was a minute long or 10 hours, it just like, you were so inspired, because no matter how, and some of the lives he, you know, portrayed, it was rough and pathetic, and people died in anonymity and whatnot. But he captured the passion people had for making films, no matter what the cost, for personal life, career, whatever. So I think that's a perfect succession of
well, It's true also that the kind of classical literature definition of passion is something far more destructive too. Steve brought up, I found the different perspectives of the daughters fascinating, and also his relationship with his grandson. This is a good opportunity to bring up Camilla, someone you haven't met.
No.
Fabio Frizzi said that this documentary is Camilla's last testament because she died about a month after production, and that's why it's dedicated to her at the end. She had died at that point. Camilla was a very interesting figure, especially in how she viewed her father, and how, I mean, the line when she gets told that he dies, her first thought, she says she didn't even cry, was, I'm alone. So she kind of internalized that in a big way, which I can see, considering she lived the last few decades of her life, basically unable to walk after a horse riding accident. So I'm wondering what kind of insights you may have gotten from Camilla, especially if we put that in the perspective that she says their family can be seen in each film, and all the films together are a mosaic of their family. That makes me want to go back and watch the entire oeuvre and try to piece this together. Like, I wish that they had discussed that a little more, because, like, what do you mean by that? That's very interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, again, because his films don't seem overtly autobiographical, even in the sense of Cat in the Brain. I mean, yeah. It's very obvious that he's not making an autobiographical film, even though he's putting himself in it. Yeah. So because they're not overtly autobiographical or personal in a really easy way to determine, yes, you're going through them and going, like, what is it about each of those films that she saw tapped into something about the family life? And we may never know. But yeah, I mean, she was fascinating. I had not really known anything about her. So it was a complete revelation. And the fact that, I mean, it's very sad that she didn't get to direct that film.
Oh my God.
That they talked about, because it seemed like it was something that he wanted her to do. And I think she wanted to do, but I mean, I completely understand how taking on a task like that is monumental.
Yeah. And in the mirroring of the Rock's mask, and that particular episode as well. Really quick aside, Jeff Pearson said, just found episodes of Incredibly Strange Film Show on YouTube, FYI.
Yeah, but they're not all available, no, and they're not in very good quality, and some of them are just not, you can't find them at all. Mm-hmm. I think he did 3 seasons too, so there were a lot of them. I can't remember where they aired, but I was fortunate enough to see them all on some channel. I don't know where they ran them, but they were great.
Keep looking, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed, God, why did I interview him? I interviewed him for something I think related to Comic-Con once. Mm-hmm. And I asked him at the end of the interview, I said, like, how come we can't get this? And basically it was copyright.
Yeah.
Because he used so many clips. They were cleared for copyright in the UK, but no way in the US.
Yeah. I mean, that's always that evil kind of hiccup, is like, oh, this is filled with music that we need to pay for.
Yep.
So it can't be released. Non-human factors. Okay. I'm going to come back to some of these because I want to get to the question actually I was going to ask you before. So I posed a question to the director of this documentary, who, by the way, teaches film at University of Milan. And so we had a lot of interesting things to say. But I asked him, he even said, I asked him how he discovered Fulci. And he said that he discovered Fulci reading in a book of horror directors. And he says the director was not very nice to Fulci's films. And so I asked him, I was like, you know what, Fulci had, it took decades for his films to be recognized as anything more than just sheer trash exploitation. Like, basically till when you talked about Rolling Thunder releasing The Beyond, that's like, 96 or 97, whenever that happened. That is really when people started to look at these things in a new light. More than just the fans, um, besides Rolling Thunder putting its stamp of approval, we could suggest that one is one reason. What do you think changed the culture's mind about a lot of these movies?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with access too, because they weren't readily available. You would either have to catch them when they might have played, at either repertory houses or when they came out originally. I think there was a bit of an off-putting quality to them because of that strange sort of dubbing that went on. And I think people had that was one hurdle to get over. And, I mean, it's hard to say what makes these films kind of come into their own, but I think they met with resistance on a certain level because of the gore and the violence. They were also from a foreign country, which again makes it harder to get distribution and, to just get seen here. So there were a couple of strikes against them. But, as people discovered them, and especially people who had a voice to say, like, hey, look at this cool thing I found. And, that was about the time that if you were at Comic-Con and stuff, you were finding bootlegs of these things because they weren't readily available in other formats. And there's a whole mystique and romance to stuff that's hard to find. And
that's how I saw all of them at first.
Yeah. So, there's a real, I mean, I remember there was the Blue Door bookstore next to the Guild Theater had a book on spaghetti horror that was sealed up in saran wrap. And they didn't have it open because they said somebody was offended by the images. And I was desperate to get that book. And I think I'm trying to think how old I would have been. Maybe I was in college, maybe. And I asked for it for Christmas. And my parents bought it for me. And when I got it, I like ripped open the saran wrap so I could, see what was inside. And my mom saw the pictures and was like, oh my God, if we knew what was in that book, we wouldn't have got it for you. And I was like, Mom, it says spaghetti horror. What do you think it is? But I mean, that I can't remember. That was like probably the early 80s, maybe. And so, if they were sealing up the book, and I was dying to find out what was inside there, because I think at that point I had seen like a few Dario Argento films, things like Phenomena and Suspiria. And so I was hooked for that reason, but I hadn't yet seen Fulci stuff. Right. I think. I mean, I'm trying to put that in perspective, but I just remember that thing was in saran wrap, and it was just, of course, that makes it 10 times more attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the big conundrum about this stuff, because, like, on one hand, I'm glad that they are being seen in a different light. Not by some people; they're still seen as trash by a lot of people. But on the other hand, there's something nice about it being kind of a renegade trash. There's something alluring about that aspect of it. I've got a couple of, Steve says there was a small mom and pop video store in Bensonhurst that carried a lot of Italian films back in the late 80s, early 90s. Saw a lot of amazing stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is how a lot of us saw it. I mean, I wonder where they got it. But you take The Beyond, okay? So The Beyond is talked about in this documentary as kind of a magnum opus. Simona talked about it as a magnum opus. For a lot of people, it's their favorite Fulci film. Not everybody. But when The Beyond was actually legitimately released in the 80s here, it was called The Seven Doors of Death, and it was cut to pieces. And probably most devastating, if I were to look at the strongest of Fulci's films, which is like mostly the horror stuff from 78 to 82, it's like, yeah, it's like that trilogy. It's City of the Living Dead, House by the Cemetery, The Beyond, Zombie, of course. And one thread through almost all of those, except for House by the Cemetery, is Fabio Frizzi. And the music of Fabio Frizzi just changes everything about those films. And the Seven Doors of Death replaced the score, which is like criminal. And I think because it's really not, I mean, it's eerie, but it's not a horror score, some parts of it are, but I love in the documentary, they're talking to, the DP, Sergio Salvati. They're talking to Sergio Salvati, and he's talking about, it's like, he was terrified when Lucio came to him to do The Beyond because it ends with this vision of the beyond. It's like, how the hell are we going to do this? And he's like, we just threw some sand on the ground. But the fact that they made that work, that's such a memorable scene with nothing. I mean, you and I talk about, the innovation of restriction, right? And that they did that. But the music in that scene is not terrifying. It's more like melancholy.
Yeah.
And it really affects the strength in a pot. Like, it's so much stronger for it. And I'm wondering how much that had to do with it. That could be just me viewing my own perspective on it, but that was criminal for me. I first saw it as the Seven Doors of Death, and it was much better when I think I first saw the real score either in a bootleg or in the late 90s when that was legitimately released for the first time in the States. Is Fabio Frizzi's score. So, not to make this all about Fabio, you and I both love him. So, Jeff Alderman says, for me, the genius of Fulci horror is the storytelling. They're like reading a summer horror novel visually, in spite of Bob. All right. So I have to ask this, and we'll see if Jeff answers that. So there are two Bobs this could be. There's Bob from City of the Living Dead, who's played by Giovanni Ribisi, and he's kind of the weird, perverted man-child. And then there's Bob from House by the Cemetery, who's the little kid. Or maybe is that Giovanni Ribisi? Anyway, which Bob do you mean, Jeff? Let me know. But I like both Bobs.
Maybe it's Bob from Twin Peaks. I don't know.
Maybe David Lynch got his Bob from those Bobs. Okay, he went with House. Okay, so actually, I think I got the name wrong. I think the kid is Giovanni Ribisi. No, Giovanni Ribisi is another actor. Damn, Italian names. Let me look it up. I'm embarrassing myself. I'm gonna have to edit the hell out of this. So Bob.
A few people already know what's happening.
That's okay. It's okay if they know I'm embarrassing. Okay. All right. Radice. Giovanni Radice plays Bob in City of the Living Dead. I was close. Yeah, so you don't like, there's not the only one, Jeff. There are two Bobs. Bob the Kid, he annoys a lot of people. I don't know. He works for me for some reason. But I don't know. That we're going off topic here. One of the people you might not have recognized, who I really liked being in the documentary, is Nicola Soavi, who is the director of The Cemetery Man, Dell'Amore Della Morte. He is in City of the Living Dead. He's the boyfriend in the car who gets killed after watching his girlfriend puke out her guts. It's like the single most iconic scene in that film. And what I love about his interview, a lot of the interviews are very melancholy because they're looking at Fulci through these kind of rose-colored glasses, except for Camilla, but because she's pretty blunt about some things. But Soavi's story is about kind of the raging tyrant Fulci, right? He's the fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck. When he was talking about the dubbing. Um, and what I find also interesting about that is Soavi looked up to Fulci so much that after the tirade, after the rage, after being yelled at, and Fulci storming off the set, screaming expletives, when that scene was finally done, he pats Soavi on the shoulder and says, "Good job," and he took that like it was a badge of honor. I'm wondering what do you think about that that kind of love-hate relationship that he had there? Like, I will take abuse, and when you love me, I will love it more.
I mean, I think when you deal with people that you perceive as genius in some way, you're willing to put up with a lot because the end result is something that you respect and admire. I mean, it's hard to put up with that kind of behavior when the people are not talented and you don't respect it. And then it just becomes kind of diva posturing.
Right.
But when people, I think, are truly, gifted with some sort of talent, and you understand that sometimes working through that creative process is incredibly frustrating because you have this vision in your head or you have this idea you want to get done. And especially in Fulci's case, where you may not have the money or the means to get what you want on the screen, I can imagine that the level of frustration is very high. So I think, I mean, I've worked with people that I really respect in terms of their talent. And I know that like they've had temper tantrums or they yell at people. But if they genuinely come to you and say, yeah, that was a good job, it really means a lot. And I think, again, I think it really has to do with the type of artist that a person is. And I think with Fulci, obviously, there was the sense that what he ended up getting on the screen was totally worth it.
You talked to Antonella Fulci, and you got a story from the set of Zombie with oh, I forget the name of the actress who plays
Katarina McCall.
No.
Oh,
she's not in that. That would be
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's her name? Oh my gosh, Rosemary's Baby's sister.
Yeah, Tissa Farrow.
Yeah, Tisa Farrow's in that. I am so tired. I can't think of anyone's name. Now I feel better about Giovanni Radici. Tisa Farrow is in that, not Katriana. But no, she was the girlfriend who went swimming with the shark.
Oh, that actually was a Richard Johnson story from Abattoir Film Festival.
Oh, what? Okay, so it wasn't Antonella. Okay, so tell
no, Antonella, because I interviewed Katarina McCall and Antonella Fulci when Rolling Thunder released The Beyond, and Antonella mentioned when you were referencing, how these films were perceived when they came out, she says they weren't B movies. She goes, they were Z movies. She says, like nobody respected them.
Yeah.
No, and I don't even remember all the details of that story. But so this was hilarious just in itself. So they had Richard Johnson at the Abattoir Festival, which is this wonderful festival in Wales, very small, very intimate. I think it's like a couple hundred seats or 300 seats in the theater, but everyone, it's kind of like Telluride. I mean, everybody kind of mingles around and you see the celebrities and there's not this huge distance. But they had invited Richard Johnson, who apparently racked up an enormous bar bill, like $1,000 or something. And that's probably like more money than they spent on the films. But yeah, he had told a story about that actress not being able to act. And oh man, I forget the details of it, but it was just, there was something about eating grass, I remember.
So from what I remember of the story,
I have to write these things down.
Yeah.
My brain cells are going.
Like Fulci himself got on the ground and started eating the grass to show her how to do it. Like,
yeah.
Screaming at her.
But he was absolutely enraged that she could not it was like a single line or a single action that she just could not do.
Yeah.
But she was the only one, I think, who would swim naked in with the sharks. And what she got the role. But yeah, that was
It was her death scene, right? It was her death scene that she couldn't do. She had to fall backward. The zombie attacks her, and she falls backward with the zombie into the grass in that old cemetery.
Yeah.
And that's what she had trouble doing, is falling backward into the grass, if I remember correctly.
Oh.
Which I'm probably not, so paraphrasing. Forgive us.
I have to write these things down.
I know the tape for that has to exist somewhere. We do have Steve. It does have that. Oh, it does seem that Fulci had difficulty showing his emotions even to his family. I think that's just a common thing for a lot of men in that generation. That's actually so Italian men. And I did want to let everybody at home know, wow, we've got more people joining. That's great. We did want our friend Antonio Iannotta to join this conversation from San Diego Italian Film Festival. He is Italian himself. And one of the big reasons I wanted to talk to him was to get his perspective on things like that. Like, how much of an outlier was Fulci in terms of that quality, the difficulty relating, the difficulty emoting around his family, and also like some of the kind of chauvinistic aspects that certainly come out, and how much of that was Fulci, how much of that was him being an Italian man who was born in 1927 and experiencing Italy going through many cultural shifts in a very short period of time. But those are questions I think we're going to have to just wonder right now. And hopefully, Antonio.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that Italian culture had a strong influence on him, and the fact that he had 2 daughters and no sons, and the difficulty for him to relate to these 2 women, and being in a culture that was very patriarchal, I'm sure it had an influence. But I'm sure that could be aggravated by his own personality. But I'm sure those underlying factors were definitely there, and I'm sure that they had some sort of impact.
Yeah, on not only his films, but how he related to basically everybody around him. And one of the things I appreciate about the film are some of the old home video clips, the pictures.
Yeah, those are great.
And some of the sometimes disturbing, like audio journals of Fulci, kind of confessing certain feelings that certainly in today's mores we would find kind of repugnant. But one thing that kind of comes to mind with that too, I forget who said it in the documentary. It was someone who worked. He was asked, why was Fulci unable to really fulfill his career? And the answer was partly it was his own fault. He was too truthful. He was too blunt. He would tell people the truth to their face. You and I both know that's a problem in this industry. So I feel like some of those audio journals where he's talking about himself, he's doing the same thing, right? He's being very blunt with himself about things that he's very uncomfortable about. That's what I think Cat in the Brain was a lot about too. So thoughts on Fulci personally putting worms in the actress's mouth? I knew that would come up with someone. I do, because that's been talked about for a long time. I'm gonna ask you to take that one.
Well,
he had to be the one to do it himself. He couldn't. He was like, forget the actor. Yeah.
I mean, but think about it. If you're a director and you're doing horror, you always want to go one more step, right? And you want to see what your actors are willing to do. And sometimes you're shocked that they're actually willing to do the thing that you don't think they're going to do.
Yeah.
So, and I do remember, this isn't worms in the mouth, but Katerina McCall was talking about working on The Beyond, and she said she was so impressed by his makeup people and his effects people And she said one of the things was when the zombies were all done, they would take a pot of jam and pour it over their heads so that it would run down. And she was so impressed that it was something so simple, a jar of marmalade, that would be added. And she said it looked great.
I forget the name of the actor who was in Drag Me to Hell, Sam Raimi's horror movie, because she also allowed herself to be put through the ringer quite a lot, including bugs in the mouth. That happened. It wasn't Sam Raimi's hand shoving them in there, but it was like dumping them onto her face and in her mouth.
She had vomit and snot and like every conceivable liquid bodily fluid
in an open grave filled with muddy water for hours and hours and hours. And Sam Raimi, from the beginning, from the first Evil Dead and even the short that he made to sell Evil Dead, he tortured the hell out of his actors and loved it, especially Bruce Campbell. But
well, he has a very Looney Tunes, Three Stooges, kind of sense of humor, and he is just like that kid sitting with gleeful delight at someone else's discomfort and horror. I mean, I'm not sure that the motivation for Raimi is the same as for Fulci. Raimi seemed very much just like the prankster, mischievous, like, ooh, can I get them to do that?
With Fulci, it's hard to tell. I mean, that's why. Alison Lohman, thank you. Yep, Physical Torment. Yeah, that's her, Alison Lohman. Thank you, Jeff Alderman. And Jimmy Detroit, Alison Lohman. Thank you. I like when y'all can actually correct me, because
we have cat on the brain.
There's a cat tearing our brain to shreds. I don't know. The answer to the worm question, and the reason it keeps coming up is nobody knows. Fulci's dead. That was a long time ago, and it is a pretty nasty scene, but it's one that people remember. Shoulders. People have done worse things.
But that's the thing. People remember it.
Yeah. Nick Cage ate a gigantic cockroach in Vampire's Kiss and said it is the thing he single most regrets ever doing.
Well, and you could say Leonardo DiCaprio won an Oscar because he ate a bison liver.
Oh yeah, that's right too. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder what y'all think in the chat. You can talk amongst yourselves on the worm issue. A lot of the discussion on the worm issue, people project their own thoughts onto it. I don't know. I don't know. One thing there was the Bolognini quote from before, of course, Fulci became who Fulci was, where he said, and again, this is coming from Sergio Salvati, who is a great friend of Fulci. And it's like, man, how much of this is rose-colored glasses? How much is this bullshit? No one can write and make nice films except someone named Lucio Fulci. And of course, that's not what we think of when we think of Fulci. But yeah, like, what an interesting quote from someone like Bolognini. That's what happens when you talk to people's friends about their friends who died decades earlier. I don't know. That one I wrote down because it stuck with me. Making deal with nothing.
Maybe his friends just have a different definition of nice.
Yes, or yes, that's true. That came after someone referred to Fulci as a funny communist, and that he had a good sense of humor. He was funny. I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with
funny, like a clown. What? I amuse you?
Am I a clown to you? A funny communist. I thought about that too, because
you also have to think too. These are people speaking English as their second language.
True.
So choice of words. Somebody was showing the T-shirts that some South Koreans were wearing, and instead of saying "fuck the police," it says "I really don't like the cops." And it was just, it was amusing because obviously somebody had translated it.
Yeah.
But didn't quite get the gist.
It was like those Hello Kitty shirts that came out that said "Greetings to the kitten." Yeah, I remember that.
So maybe that comment was meant to be something slightly different. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. Well, that leads to misleading conversations. Oh, some directors do seem to torment their actors. I mean, I'm sure we could think of someone like Kubrick.
Oh, Abel Ferrara
Abel
too.
Ferrara, yeah.
And I remember what Adrian Lyne and Mickey Rourke tormented. What's her name? The skittish actress. God, why am I forgetting people now? In 9.5 Weeks.
Yeah, I know of the film, but I can't.
I'm sorry.
It's people, get on it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Kim Basinger.
Yes.
Kim Basinger. But I mean, apparently they ganged up on her to make her feel just horribly abused on that set to get a performance.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a common tactic that directors take to, and it doesn't always have to be that in per se, but that a director or an actor will take a particular tact in order to elicit a certain response from the actors. I mean, I can't remember what film it was. There was some film where, you know, the actor was playing somebody who was kind of like an outsider, and he said, like, yeah, I would never have lunch breaks with the rest of the cast because I didn't want to feel a sense of camaraderie with them. I wanted to feel constantly like I was the outsider. So, you know, people do it to themselves and actors do it to them, and directors do it to them. But, you know, that's a technique.
I am also reminded too, on the other side of the coin, was it Richard Harris talking to Dustin Hoffman about the method acting thing? And his famous line to him when he was kind of snide was, "It's called acting, my boy."
Yeah. Oh, I think there was, who was, no, it was somebody had mentioned that for the Joker.
Oh yeah.
That he had banged his knee like and injured it. Mm-hmm. And like that's why he was in legitimate pain, and somebody said, well, Meryl Streep would have just acted hurt, you know, or something like that. But the classic thing was, you know, somebody had asked Spencer Tracy, like, you know, how do I enter a room, and you know, and he's just like, you know, you just memorize your lines and don't bump into the furniture, and he says, that's it. Like, what else is there?
I love Spencer Tracy. Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's funny. A line that I loved was, even the color, I mean, obviously I'm quoting the subtitles, but even the color of blood is beautiful in Zombie. Talking about, like, you know, Fulci would still use really rich colors, really comic book-esque colors. And that really is something else that makes them stand out. They're not drab. You know?
Well, I think that's true of a lot of Italian horror. I mean, we've talked about this before in terms of the spaghetti westerns. I mean, Django, when they're depicting supposedly the Ku Klux Klan people, instead of white hoods, they have them in red hoods because, well, red looks a whole hell of a lot better, you know, across the screen coming at you than the white ones. But, you know, all those spaghetti horror films, I mean, it was really about that just bold expression of color, and you didn't want things to necessarily look realistic because then you're dealing with violence on a whole different level. And they were really dealing with it, you know, violence was a canvas to them. It's like blood's the paint.
In the interview I just did with Fabio, actually, he said that recently he went to a 35 millimeter screening of Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And he said it was the first time I saw it since then. But Sergio Salvati was there, the DP, the director of photography. And he went up to Salvati and said, why does the sky look, he talked about the quality of the way the sky looks and why it looks so odd. And Sergio Salvati said, Fulci wanted a filter to make it look like it was like not real. Like there's artifice. It's like a dream. And I think that was really what he was doing with all of his films. Is you hear people say, you know, there's no real plot. It doesn't really make sense. I can't tell what's going on. I mean, I think that's part of the dreamlike aspect of them as well. Even the thriller. I mean, look at, we did Lizard in a Woman's Skin this weekend. That, you know, ultimately it's a thriller, it's a giallo, but it starts with crazy dreamlike sequences. It has LSD trips. It's not just a straight crime thriller. It's even in giallo standards, it's a weird movie. I love it. Oh God, so we got people talking. Oh, I have to go back. There's a lot of talk. Okay, Kubrick abused Shelley Duvall. Saving Private.
Oh, list of abuse.
Yes, yeah. There's still. We're past the abuse. Oh, so Jimmy Detroit says Gunnar Hansen separated himself in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Partly he might have smelled real bad because it was like 150 degrees in that house. Jimmy, the blood looks like red paint in a lot of giallo. It was stage paint. It was stage blood. And that's actually one of the things I love about it, especially on white. Jeff Alderman, so now I swear Carpenter grabbed the dog scene from Lizard for The Thing. I don't know. I'm not going to blame Carpenter for taking anything. Sometimes the same ideas happen in different ways. I can't get over that scene with the foxes. Ew, that's true. I love old paint blood. Me too. Yeah, the scene with the foxes is tough to watch. It really is. Yeah. Italian cinema, especially from the time. The Wikipedia entry for Lizard says they were almost charged with animal cruelty for the dog scene. Someone believed it. Are you talking about The Thing, Jenny, or the Lizard in the Woman's Skin? I'm wondering. I think you're probably talking about Lizard in a Woman's Skin. I will say that Italian horror cinema, and actually not just horror cinema, like Mondo Cane, those mockumentaries that came out, Giallo, had a lot of lawsuits and charges for all kinds of cruelty, some of which was valid and some of which wasn't. There's the classic story of Cannibal Holocaust, which does have, an unlimited amount of animal cruelty in it. So if you're sensitive to that, you want to avoid that one. But what he was charged with was, there is a scene where the documentarians find a woman who's been impaled, vaginally impaled, with it coming out, with the other end of it coming out of her mouth. It's a pretty iconic scene in that, and people believed that was real. And that was, for whatever you think about Cannibal Holocaust, the way they pulled off that effect is actually really elegant and clever, which was, she was sitting on a bicycle seat and had the stick just put it in her mouth and had to sit really still. It was good on the actress to stay so still. And they had to build that again in the courtroom. That's just to prove this is how we did it. Here she is. She's alive. She's cool. We're good. But yeah, as far as the foxes scene in Lizard in a Woman's Skin, I'm not sure what would have gone on with that. Oh, Steve, I loved those Mondo films. I know a lot was fake, but still, Steve, some of those are brutal, man. Brutal Mondo Cane films. But I do have them all, and I have the soundtrack. So who am I? Who am I to talk? Oh my God, we're only 6 minutes away from the end.
And you disappeared.
Yeah. Oh, I disappeared completely.
Yes.
Oh,
right when you confess to your Mondo addiction.
My phone, the webcam app, force quit, so it hates me for confessing that. Okay. Amazing. I think we only have time for any final thoughts, Beth, about the documentary and Fulci in general.
I mean, I hope things like this just inspire people to go and see the films, and just that they get wider distribution. Yeah, I mean, when theaters open again, I mean, it's so nice to see these films. on a big screen as they're meant to be seen. And part of what makes horror so much fun is seeing it with an audience, because whether you're the jaded person who doesn't scream, or you're the jumper and the screamer who covers their eyes and whatever,
we love.
yes, but the thing is there's all those people in the theater reacting, and it's fun to see either the stuff that you don't react to that they do, or the stuff that you find scary that other people don't, and just that communal sense of being scared in the dark, or grossed out or whatever. And with some of Fulci's films, that seeing where people kind of like hit the breaking point is really part of what those films are about. And so I hope that this leads to more retrospectives and more screenings of his films, and that his films are taken seriously. I mean, first of all, horror as a genre isn't taken all that seriously. Italian cinema of this kind, where they're dubbed and people still make jokes about that, aren't taken as seriously. So it's nice to see him getting some respect and getting some tribute paid.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I want to say about the communal experience is your emotions get amplified by other people's emotions around you, and it really increases the power of a lot of films. I guess we're out of time. I do see that Jenny, in typical hilarious Jenny fashion, when my phone went out, or my webcam went out, said that was the FBI. Jimmy Detroit says 5 of Fulci's films are on Shudder, so definitely check those out. I do want to mention anyone who was not able to catch, I mean, it's 9/26 now. We're like, there's no way to catch the documentary through us anymore. Severin Films starts the pre-order for the Blu-ray on June 26th. So I have to thank Severin for allowing us to show it so near to their Blu-ray release. Definitely pick it up. Tell your friends to pick it up, and have a Fulci party with, you've got it on Shudder, $5 a month, and you can watch all this good stuff. Anyway, it's 9/27. Thanks for talking Fulci with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we'll blast this out when we're done. I want to thank everybody who's here. That's it. That is all of the Campfire Tales. I can relax, and I'm happy with the way Eventive went out. So let's keep doing this, Beth. We've got to see what our next Film Geek stuff is. I know that everybody, half the people in the chat are our Film Geeks people, so they're going to want to know.